Imagine waking up each morning and stepping straight into a storm. That's what it's like when we don't realize who's in control, us or our thoughts. For most of us, the storm doesn't come from the outside world. It comes from within. It's the swirl of ideas, doubts, judgments, and assumptions that start the moment we open our eyes. We don't question where those thoughts came from or why they're there. We just let them in, give them space, and then react as if they're real. That's how the mind starts to control us. But what if instead we could pause for a moment, just one moment, and ask, is this thought true? Is this thought useful? Is it mine, or is it just noise? The truth is, most of us are not taught to observe our thoughts. We're not trained to sit with them. We're not even taught to question them. From a young age, we're told what to think, what success looks like, what failure means, who we're supposed to be. And then we grow up and wonder why we feel anxious, stuck, or unfulfilled. It's not that we're broken. It's that we've never been shown how to manage the inner dialogue that shapes our reality. See, awareness isn't just about noticing what's going on around you. It's about noticing what's going on inside you. It's being able to hear your own internal voice and understand whether it's serving you or sabotaging you. Because until we learn to observe our thoughts, we don't stand a chance at guiding them. We react instead of responding. We spiral instead of steadying ourselves. And in that moment, the mind becomes the master. But what if we flipped that? What if we said, I want to lead my thoughts, not follow them? That starts with awareness. And awareness is not some abstract mystical practice. It's a skill. It's something we can develop. It's the conscious act of stepping back from a thought and saying, I see you, not fighting it, not feeding it, just seeing it. That's the first moment of power. That's when you stop being a prisoner of your mind and start being the observer. And the observer has options. Most people don't know they have a choice. When anxiety hits, when fear creeps in, when insecurity whispers, most of us think we have to listen. We think the thought has power just because it appeared. But let's get something clear. A thought is not a fact. A thought is not a command. A thought is not the truth. A thought is just a suggestion. You get to choose what to do with it. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine you're walking into a room to give a presentation. Suddenly your mind says, you're going to mess this up. They're not going to take you seriously. Now, if you're not aware of that thought, if you're not present enough to notice it, you'll absorb it. You'll believe it. And then your body will respond. Your hands shake, your voice trembles, your mind races, and suddenly the fear becomes a reality. Not because it was true, but because you let it lead. But if you're aware, if you catch the thought the moment it shows up, you get to challenge it. You get to say, I hear you, but I'm not going to follow you. And that changes everything. It's like standing at a crossroads. One path leads to a familiar pattern, doubt, fear, paralysis. The other path leads to conscious choice. And the difference between the two isn't willpower, it's awareness. That's the hinge, that's the inflection point. Now here's the part most people miss. You don't have to control every thought. That's exhausting. That's not the goal. The goal is not control, it's clarity. It's the ability to see your thoughts without being swept away by them. Like standing on the bank of a river, watching the current flow. The thoughts come. Some are helpful, some are hurtful, but they all pass unless you jump in and get carried away. The discipline is in staying on the bank. We can practice this in simple moments. When you're stuck in traffic and your mind says, this is ridiculous, I'm wasting time, you can catch it. When someone criticizes you and your mind says, I'm not good enough, you can catch it. When you wake up and feel the weight of the day before you even get out of bed, you can catch it. And in that pause, in that moment of noticing, you create space. And in that space, you get to choose. Most people don't realize how powerful that space is. That space is freedom. That space is where your strength lives. Because that's where you remember you are not your thoughts. You are the one watching them. And once you understand that, everything begins to shift. You stop reacting to life and start responding. You stop being driven by fear and start being guided by intention. You stop letting the mind run the show and you begin to lead. It doesn't mean the negative thoughts stop coming. They won't. It doesn't mean you'll always catch them in time. You won't. But every time you do, you build strength. Every time you catch a thought and choose to pause, you reclaim a little more of your mind. And over time, that awareness becomes your new normal. That inner stillness becomes your anchor. Think of it like a muscle. At first, it's weak. You don't notice your thoughts until they've already taken you down a path. But with practice, you get quicker. You start to recognize the familiar patterns. You start to notice how certain triggers lead to certain thoughts, and you start to prepare. You build mental stamina You build emotional intelligence. You build resilience, not by fighting your thoughts, but by noticing them without becoming them. Because here's the truth. You don't have to believe everything you think. You don't have to follow every impulse. You don't have to react to every feeling. You get to pause. You get to reflect. You get to choose. That's the foundation of real control. Not dominance, not suppression, but leadership. Leading yourself first before you try to lead others. And it all begins with awareness. With that one simple practice of noticing what your mind is doing when you're not paying attention. Because that's where the work starts. Not in the big moments, but in the small ones. Not when everything is falling apart, but when everything seems fine. Because that's when the habits are forming. That's when the patterns take hold. And if you can train yourself to be present in those moments, to be aware, to be still, to be curious, then you begin to reshape your relationship with your mind. You begin to guide it gently, intentionally, with compassion. You begin to lead from within. Control doesn't come from force. It comes from understanding. And the more you understand your thoughts, the less control they have over you. Because in the end, it's simple. You either run your mind or your mind runs you. Let's go a little deeper. There's something really important we need to get clear on. Something most people never stop to think about. Your mind is not your enemy. It's not some evil force working against you. But it's also not your master. It's a tool. A powerful, complex, incredibly efficient tool. And just like any tool, it can be used to build something extraordinary, or it can cause a lot of damage if it's left running unsupervised. The question is, who's holding the tool? Who's in charge? Because here's what happens to most people. They go through life letting their mind call the shots. They believe every thought that pops up. They obey every mental story without question. They let their emotions, driven by thoughts, steer every decision. And after a while, they lose their sense of self in the process. They forget that they are the one who's supposed to be in charge, not the mind, them. The mind is incredibly fast. It's reactive. It's built for survival, not peace. So when it sees uncertainty, it screams. When it sees failure, it panics. When it senses discomfort, it finds a way to escape, whether through distraction, procrastination, or criticism. The mind wants to protect you, but it doesn't always know how to serve you. And that's why you can't just let it run the show. See, when you treat your mind like the master, you're giving control over to something that's not designed to lead. Think about a race car, powerful, fast, high performance. But would you let it drive itself? Of course not. It needs a skilled driver. Otherwise, all that power becomes dangerous. That's your mind. It's brilliant. But it needs direction. We get in trouble when we assume our thoughts are us. When we say things like, I'm anxious, I'm a failure, I'm not good enough. No. You're experiencing anxiety. You're facing a challenge. You're working through doubt. That might seem like a small difference, but it's everything. Because the moment you identify with your thoughts, you shrink. You become limited to whatever script your mind is running. But when you create that space, when you say, this is something I'm feeling, not something I am, you step back into the driver's seat. Let me be really clear. You are not your thoughts. You are the thinker. You are not your feelings. You are the one experiencing them. That distinction is where your power lives. It's subtle, but it's life-changing. Because it means you can look at a thought and decide, is this helpful or harmful? Is this coming from fear or from clarity? Is this leading me forward or holding me back? And once you get good at that, once you start checking in, even in the smallest moments, you begin to take ownership of your life. You start making decisions based on what matters, not just what's loud. You start responding instead of reacting. That's when you begin to lead your mind instead of being led by it. And leadership, real leadership, always starts with self. You can't lead a team, a family, or a community if you can't first lead your own mind. That's why this matters so much. This isn't just about inner peace or personal development. This is about how you show up in the world. Because if your thoughts are in control of you, then your actions are being shaped by fear, insecurity, or habit. But if you're in control of your thoughts, then your actions are grounded in intention, clarity, and courage. Here's the irony. When you treat your mind like the master, it starts behaving like a tyrant. It becomes demanding, loud, relentless. It throws out every worst-case scenario, every self-judgment, every limiting belief, and it does it with confidence. And the more you listen, the more power it gets. Until eventually, you don't even realize that you've stopped thinking freely. You're just following orders from a voice that's only supposed to be advising you, not running your life. But when you treat your mind like a tool, something that works for you, not the other way around, everything begins to shift. You begin to use your thoughts strategically. You start filtering them. You start deciding which ones deserve your attention and which ones you can let go. And suddenly, your energy isn't being spent on worry or doubt. It's being directed toward what matters. Now, this isn't about ignoring your thoughts or pretending everything's fine. That's not strength, that's avoidance. This is about acknowledging what your mind is saying, but deciding for yourself how much power it gets. Your mind might say, "You're not ready for this." And you say, "I hear you, but I'm doing it anyway." Your mind might say, "This could go wrong." And you say, "Yes, but it could also go right." You're not silencing the voice, you're just not letting it run the meeting. That's what it means to lead your mind. It's not about shutting it down. It's about managing the relationship. Just like any leadership relationship, it's built on clarity, boundaries, and communication. You listen, you assess, and then you choose. We have to stop assuming that the voice in our head always knows best. It's not always wise. It's not always truthful. And it's certainly not always aligned with who we want to be. The mind is like a mirror. It reflects back everything it's picked up over the years, what you've been told, what you feared, what you failed at. It remembers, it stores. But it doesn't always interpret accurately. And that's why you can't blindly follow it. Instead, you lead it. You retrain it. You feed it new inputs. You teach it what you want it to focus on. Gratitude, purpose, discipline, empathy. And just like any tool, the more you use it with intention, the sharper and more useful it becomes. This takes work, and it takes consistency, because your mind will resist. It likes being in charge. It's built to scan for threats, to find problems, to keep you safe. But your job isn't just to be safe. Your job is to grow, to lead, to live with meaning. And that means you have to be willing to interrupt the autopilot, to challenge the default scripts, to say, "No, I'm not going to let this thought decide how I show up today." And sometimes that means sitting in discomfort. It means hearing the fear and still choosing courage. It means recognizing the voice of doubt and still taking the next step. But that's what leadership looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. You can't be passive about this. You can't afford to just hope your mind behaves today. You have to show up and lead it. Every single day, especially on the hard ones. Especially when you don't feel like it, because that's when the old patterns try to sneak back in. That's when the mind tries to grab the wheel. But you've already decided it works for you now, not the other way around. So the next time a thought shows up and tries to take over, pause, take a breath, and remind yourself this is just a tool. I decide how it's used. Because if you don't run your mind, it will run you. Let's talk about something we all deal with, but most of us never truly confront. Negative thinking. Now, I don't mean the occasional doubt or the passing frustration. I'm talking about the patterns. Those deeply ingrained loops that play over and over again in our heads. The ones that show up when we're alone, when things go quiet, or when we're on the edge of something new. The voice that says, "You're not good enough, you'll mess this up. Why even try?" That voice. The problem isn't that we have those thoughts. The problem is that we believe them. We take them at face value. We let them speak as if they're the truth. But they're not. That voice isn't telling you facts. It's repeating habits. And the most dangerous part, we don't even question it. You see, negative thinking is just that thinking, not reality. Not destiny, not who you are. It's a mental reflex shaped by years of conditioning, experiences, fears, and old stories we picked up along the way. Maybe someone told you you weren't smart enough. Maybe you failed once and decided that meant you'd always fail. Maybe you grew up comparing yourself to others and started seeing your worth through a distorted lens. Whatever the reason, those thoughts didn't come from nowhere. They were formed, which means they can be unformed. We like to think that because a thought feels real, it must be true. But feelings aren't facts, they're just signals. And those signals can get crossed, especially when we've spent years wiring our brains to expect the worst. The thing is, the brain loves patterns. It's efficient. If you think a certain way often enough, your brain builds shortcuts. It goes, we're doing the self-doubt thing again. Got it. And it gets faster, more automatic. And before you know it, negative thinking becomes your default setting. But just because something's familiar doesn't mean it's right. Comfort doesn't equal truth. A worn-out couch is still uncomfortable. And many of us have been sitting on that couch for years, mentally, emotionally, because it's what we know. That critical voice, that self-sabotage, that mental spiral, it's not evidence of who you are, it's just a habit. And habits can be broken. Here's the shift. Instead of treating negative thoughts like commands, start treating them like notifications. You don't have to answer every text you get. You don't have to reply to every email. And you don't have to engage with every thought, especially the ones that aren't helping you. You get to decide which thoughts get your attention, and more importantly, You get to rewrite the script. So how do we do that? We start by noticing the story. Because that's all a thought is, a story. A narrative your brain is telling you, often without any real evidence. You'll never be successful. Based on what? No one really likes you. Says who? When you slow it down and examine the story, you realize how flimsy it is. It's like shining a flashlight on a shadow. You see there's nothing really there. And sometimes the voice sounds convincing because it uses your voice. It sounds like you, but it's not the best version of you. It's the scared version, the protective version, the version that learned early on that it's safer not to try than to risk failing. That version means well, but it's not the one that's going to get you where you want to go. The next time that negative thought shows up, don't argue with it, don't resist it. Just get curious. Ask, where is this coming from? What is this thought trying to protect me from? Is it possible there's another perspective? When you step back, even just a little, you weaken its grip. You create space. And in that space, you can choose a new thought. And this isn't about replacing negativity with blind positivity. That's not helpful either. You can't lie to yourself and expect it to work. Telling yourself everything is amazing when you don't believe it only creates more distance between where you are and where you wish you were. What you need is something grounded, something believable. If your mind says you're going to fail, you don't respond with, I'm a superstar. You respond with, I've failed before and I'm still here. That's truth, that's strength, that's power. Because reframing is not about pretending, it's about perspective. It's about taking the same situation and viewing it through a different lens. Not to ignore the challenge, but to stop assuming it defines you. You are not your setbacks. You are not your fears. You are the person who keeps showing up in spite of them. And the more you practice this, challenging those old thought patterns, offering yourself a more grounded truth, the more your mind begins to shift. It doesn't happen overnight. But over time, those old roads get less traffic. The mental shortcuts weaken, and new ones start to form. Thoughts like, I can handle this. I've done hard things before. This doesn't have to be perfect to be worth doing. These thoughts become your new default. Not because you forced them, but because you practiced them. And repetition is what rewires the brain. This is the difference between a mind that controls you and a mind you've learned to control. It's not that the negativity goes away completely. It's that it doesn't drive anymore. It's in the back seat. It might still speak up, but it no longer decides where you're going. And let me tell you something, everyone deals with this. No matter how confident someone seems, no matter how successful. No one's mind is silent. We all have that voice. The difference is, some people let it run their lives, and others have learned to lead it. They've built a relationship with it. One based not on fear, but on understanding. And here's what happens. When you start to break the habit of negative thinking, you begin to trust yourself again. You stop walking on eggshells around your own mind. You stop anticipating the next spiral and start building from a place of stability. It doesn't mean life stops being hard. It just means you stop making it harder by fighting ghosts that don't exist. You become more present, more intentional, more free. Because when you stop believing every negative thought, you create room for something else. Creativity, confidence, clarity. You create space to ask, what do I actually want? And then start moving toward it, not out of fear, but out of purpose. And that's the goal. Not perfection, not silence, but leadership. Leading your own mind, leading your own thoughts. Choosing which ones you build on and which ones you let pass. That's the work, and it's worth it. Because in the end, you don't get to choose what thoughts show up, but you do get to choose which ones stay. Let's talk about stillness, not the absence of sound or motion, but the kind of stillness that happens inside, that pause between reaction and response, that breath between chaos and clarity, that space where you're not being pulled in 100 directions by your thoughts, your emotions, your fears, your past. That's the kind of stillness I'm talking about. And most of us are terrified of it, because in that stillness, you can hear everything. We live in a world that rewards speed. We're told to hustle, to grind, to stay busy. We glorify productivity, movement, action. But we rarely stop to ask, what are we moving toward? Why are we running so fast? And more importantly, who's doing the running? Is it us, or is it our mind dragging us along like a frantic horse, galloping ahead without direction? We don't slow down because we've been conditioned to believe that slowing down is weakness, that stillness is laziness. But it's not. Stillness is strength. Stillness is where power begins. Because in stillness, we face ourselves. And that's the part we avoid the most. You see, when we're constantly busy, constantly distracted, constantly thinking we're rarely present, we're not here. We're somewhere else, replaying the past, rehearsing the future, reacting to imagined threats. And when we live like that for long enough, our mind becomes the master. It keeps spinning stories, fueling anxiety, feeding doubt, and we just follow. We chase the next task, the next fix, the next distraction. Also, we don't have to sit with what's real. But here's the truth. If you don't learn to be still, you'll never hear yourself. You'll never know what you really think, what you really feel, what actually matters. You'll keep listening to the loudest voice, your mind, and mistaking it for truth. Stillness isn't about doing nothing. It's about being in full control of where your attention goes. And that's one of the most difficult skills to master, because the mind doesn't want to be still. It wants to think. It wants to analyze. It wants to fix. And when there's nothing to fix, it creates something. That's what it does. The mind is a problem-solving machine. But if you don't give it direction, it starts solving problems that don't exist. It creates imaginary fears. It digs up old wounds. It amplifies self-doubt. When you don't pause, your mind fills the space with noise. But when you do pause, when you take a breath, when you step back, when you allow even a few moments of silence, you create space between you and the noise. And in that space, you get your power back. This is where real leadership begins. Not in the noise, not in the rush, but in the quiet decision to pay attention, to tune in, to listen. Not just to your thoughts, but beyond them. To notice the tension in your chest when you're not aligned with your values. To feel the tightness in your stomach when you're making choices from fear instead of trust. To see clearly, not just react blindly. Stillness helps you see patterns. You start to notice how certain environments, certain people, certain habits pull you off center. You see how quickly your mind shifts into survival mode. You recognize your triggers, not so you can avoid them, but so you can meet them with presence instead of panic. And that's the real power of stillness. It doesn't remove the storm. It teaches you how to anchor yourself in the middle of it. And let me be clear. This isn't about meditating for hours or escaping to the mountains. You don't need a retreat to find stillness. You need intention. You need awareness. You need to decide in this moment to stop letting your mind drag you from one distraction to the next. You need to choose to pause, to breathe, to be. You can find stillness in a single breath, in the walk between meetings, in the 5 seconds before you answer the phone, in the space between impulse and action. That's where the work is. And it's in those moments that you start to reclaim control, because when you pause, you interrupt the loop of fear, the loop of doubt, the loop of reactivity. You create a gap, and in that gap, you choose how to respond. You begin to lead your mind, not follow it. You begin to notice when it's spiraling and say, not today. You begin to notice when it's clinging to old stories and say, that's not who I am anymore. And that's the shift from reaction to reflection, from noise to clarity, from chaos to intention. Stillness is what gives you perspective. You can't read a map while running. You have to stop. Look around. Get your bearings. Ask, where am I really? Where do I want to go? That kind of clarity only comes when you're willing to slow down, to turn inward, to be honest. Most people are afraid to pause because they're afraid of what they'll find. They're afraid the silence will be too loud, that they'll discover just how lost they've become. But here's the thing. You can't find your way back if you don't stop long enough to realize you've drifted. Stillness isn't about control. It's about connection. It reconnects you to yourself. It grounds you in your values. It reminds you that you are not the noise in your head. You are the awareness behind it. And when you learn to tap into that awareness, you no longer get thrown around by every passing thought, every fleeting emotion. You begin to move differently. You speak with more clarity. You listen with more presence. You decide with more intention. You stop rushing decisions just to quiet the discomfort. You stop reacting just to fill the space. And instead, you start choosing. You start aligning. You become less of a passenger and more of a pilot. And the people around you feel that. They feel your steadiness, your calm, your clarity. Not because you've removed all stress from your life, but because you've stopped letting your mind dictate your every move. You've chosen stillness over panic, presence over pressure, leadership over reaction. Stillness doesn't solve everything, but it changes the way you approach everything. It gives you access to a deeper wisdom, a quieter kind of strength. And in a world that's constantly telling you to go faster, that kind of strength is revolutionary. Because when you learn to be still, you don't just hear your mind, you hear yourself. And in that space, you remember who's really in control. Let's talk about focus. Not the ability to concentrate for a few minutes, but something deeper, something much more powerful. I'm talking about the discipline of where you place your attention, moment to moment, day after day. Because the truth is, we don't get what we want in life. We get what we consistently focus on. And if your focus is scattered, so is your progress. If your mind is divided, so is your direction. And when your attention is hijacked, your potential is too. We live in the most distracted time in human history. Notifications, deadlines, messages, opinions, everything is competing for a slice of your mind. And without realizing it, many of us have handed over our focus to the loudest bidder. Not the most important, not the most meaningful, just the loudest. And when that happens, you're no longer the one steering the ship. You're just reacting to whatever shows up next. You're at the mercy of your environment. And that's dangerous because your environment doesn't always have your best interest in mind. You see, focus isn't just about productivity. It's about purpose. It's about identity. It's about deciding who you want to be and aligning your thoughts and actions around that decision. That's what focus really is, alignment. When you're focused, you're not just getting things done, you're moving with intention. You're living on purpose. But here's the catch. The mind doesn't like focus. It likes novelty. It likes stimulation. It likes quick wins and easy dopamine. Focus is uncomfortable because it requires discipline. It demands patience. It asks you to say no to distractions, to shortcuts, to things that look urgent but aren't actually important. And that's hard, especially when the world around you is addicted to immediate gratification. So how do we reclaim our focus? How do we protect it from being stolen? It starts with clarity. You can't focus if you don't know what matters. You have to define it. What do you stand for? What are you building? What kind of person are you trying to become? If you're not clear on that, everything feels important. Every email, every opinion, every opportunity looks like something you need to chase. But when you know what matters, you stop chasing and start choosing. That's the shift. From reaction to intention, from noise to signal, from scattered energy to focused direction. And here's where the mind can either be your biggest ally or your biggest saboteur. If left unchecked, your mind will always look for the path of least resistance. It will always push you toward comfort, not growth, toward distraction, not depth. It'll say, just check your phone one more time or start fresh tomorrow. And if you believe it, you lose momentum. You lose trust in yourself. You start to become someone who wants a lot but finishes little. But when you train your mind, when you build the habit of focus, you start to feel the difference. You notice how much more calm you are when you're not switching tasks every few minutes. You notice how much more confident you feel when you actually complete the things you start. You notice how much more clarity you have when your thoughts aren't bouncing around like a pinball machine. Focus creates space, mental space, emotional space. And in that space, creativity shows up, wisdom shows up, direction shows up. You begin to move from reaction to response, from impulse to strategy. You stop being busy and start being effective. And focus isn't just about what you say yes to. It's also about what you say no to. No to the endless scrolling. No to the distractions disguised as opportunities. No to the fear of missing out. You realize that every yes is a trade. When you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else, usually without even realizing it. So the question becomes, are you saying yes to what actually moves you forward? Or are you just trying to stay busy so you don't have to sit with the discomfort of focus? It takes courage to focus. Because when you focus, you have to commit. You have to choose. And once you choose, you eliminate other options. That's scary. The mind doesn't like eliminating options. It likes keeping every door open. But growth doesn't happen when all doors are open. It happens when you walk through one and shut the rest. When you say, this is the direction, and you follow through. Now, don't confuse focus with rigidity. You're allowed to pivot. You're allowed to adjust. But focus gives you a reference point. It keeps you grounded in what matters so that when life pulls you in 1,000 directions, as it inevitably will, you can come back to center. You can remember who you are, what you're building, and why it matters. And here's the beautiful part. Focus is a skill, not a trait. It's not something you're born with. It's something you practice. You don't have to get it right every time. You just have to notice when you've drifted and come back. That's all. Every time you pull your attention back to what matters, you strengthen your ability to lead your mind instead of being led by it. Focus is built in the small moments. It's built in choosing to stay with a task, even when it's boring. It's built in closing the extra browser tab. It's built in saying no to the meeting that doesn't align with your priorities. It's built in turning off notifications and trusting that the world won't collapse if you're unreachable for 30 minutes. These little choices, they add up. They create momentum. They build identity. You start to see yourself as someone who honors their time, who values their energy, who moves with purpose. And here's what happens when focus becomes a way of life. Your results compound. Your relationships deepen. Your confidence grows. Not because everything suddenly becomes easy, but because you've trained your mind to stay on course when it matters most. You stop drifting. You stop getting lost in the weeds. You start rising above the noise and making real progress. Not just movement, but meaningful movement. You also become more resilient because distractions aren't just about time, they're about avoidance. We distract ourselves because we don't want to feel discomfort. We don't want to face the uncertainty, the self-doubt, the fear. But when you build focus, you also build emotional endurance. You learn to sit with the discomfort and keep going. You learn to trust yourself to follow through, even when it's hard. And that trust, that's the foundation of everything. So the next time your mind wants to chase the next shiny thing, the next shortcut, the next hit of validation, pause. Ask yourself, is this pulling me closer to who I want to be? Or is it just keeping me busy? Am I reacting out of habit, or am I choosing out of clarity? Because in the end, focus isn't about control, it's about freedom. The freedom to decide where your energy goes. The freedom to live a life guided by purpose, not pressure. The freedom to lead your mind, not follow its every whim. And when you learn to focus your mind, you don't just change what you do, you change who you become. We all want to be in control. That's human. We want to control outcomes, situations, perceptions, especially when things feel uncertain. But here's the paradox. Real control doesn't come from tightening your grip on the outside world. It comes from letting go of the illusion that you ever had control over those things to begin with. It comes from learning to lead your mind instead of being ruled by it when things don't go your way. Because the truth is, most of the stress we carry, most of the pressure we feel, most of the internal chaos we live with, it doesn't come from what's happening around us. It comes from the story we tell ourselves about what's happening. We think we're reacting to events, but really we're reacting to our interpretation of those events, to the fear, to the meaning we attach, to the expectations we create. And when life doesn't meet those expectations, we spiral, we resist, we overthink, we try to force things. And all of that, it's the mind trying to stay in control. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean being passive. It doesn't mean not caring. It means learning to loosen your grip on the things you can't control, so you can focus your energy on the things you can. It means choosing acceptance over resistance, presence over panic. It means meeting reality as it is, not as you wish it were, not as you think it should be, but as it actually is. And this is hard, especially for high achievers, for people who've spent their lives setting goals, making plans, solving problems. We've been taught that if we just work harder, think faster, stay ahead, we can control everything. But life doesn't play by those rules. Life is messy. People are unpredictable. Circumstances change. Things fall apart. And no amount of planning or thinking can stop that. So if your peace is built on everything going your way, your peace is fragile. One unexpected moment and your entire foundation shakes. But when you shift your focus from controlling outcomes to managing your response, everything changes. That's where your power lives. In how you choose to show up when things fall apart. In how quickly you return to center when your plans unravel. In how gracefully you adapt when life refuses to follow your script. And your mind will fight you on this. It will scream for certainty. It will cling to expectations. It will replay conversations, rehearse scenarios, try to predict every outcome. That's what the mind does. It wants answers. It wants control. It wants to feel safe. But the only true safety comes from trust, not in outcomes, but in yourself, trusting that no matter what happens, you'll meet it with presence, with courage, with clarity. Letting go means trusting yourself more than the plan, more than the prediction, more than the fear. It means releasing your attachment to how things should go and staying committed to who you want to be regardless of how they actually go. That's resilience. That's emotional agility. That's inner leadership. And it's built in the small moments. When the meeting goes sideways and you choose to respond calmly instead of defensively. When the project stalls and you lean into creativity instead of blame. When someone disappoints you and you choose understanding over control. These moments, they seem small, but they're training your nervous system. They're shaping your mindset. They're teaching your mind that your peace doesn't depend on perfection. There's something profoundly liberating about letting go. When you stop trying to micromanage life, you start participating in it. You start showing up with openness, curiosity, humility. You listen more. You judge less. You feel more grounded. Not because everything is certain, but because you no longer need it to be. And when you do this, When you truly let go, something incredible happens. You make space for new possibilities, for insights that weren't available when your mind was clenched tight, or for opportunities that only emerge when you stop trying to force your way forward. You start to notice the moments you would have missed, the people you would have overlooked, the beauty in the detour you never planned. Letting go also means letting go of the stories you've been telling yourself, stories about what success has to look like, stories about who you have to be, stories about what failure means. We all have these stories. Many of them were written years ago by our parents, by society, by our past experiences, and without realizing it, we live our lives trying to validate those stories. But what if those stories aren't even true anymore? What if they never were? You don't have to keep living in a story that no longer serves you. You get to rewrite the narrative, but you can't do that if you're still clinging to the old one. Letting go is what creates space for the new chapter, for a deeper sense of identity, for a more authentic version of success. And here's the thing, letting go isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily practice, a choice you make again and again. Some days you'll be better at it than others. Some days your mind will pull you back into control mode. That's okay. The point isn't perfection, it's awareness. It's noticing when you've gripped too tight and gently loosening your hold. There's a quiet strength in that. A strength that doesn't need to dominate, doesn't need to prove, doesn't need to force. A strength that knows, I don't have to control everything to lead well. I don't have to have all the answers to make progress. I don't have to predict the future to be at peace in the present. You lead yourself differently when you let go. You become more agile, more compassionate, more intentional. And people feel that. They trust you more, not because you have all the solutions, but because you're steady, you're real. You're grounded in something deeper than just results. You can still set goals. You can still work hard. You can still care deeply. But you do it from a place of alignment, not anxiety, from presence, not pressure. You stop trying to bend life to your will and start walking with it. You stop resisting what is and start responding to it. And that shift from resistance to response, that's the mark of someone who truly leads their mind instead of being led by it. So the next time your mind tries to tighten its grip, pause, breathe. Remember that control isn't always strength. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let go. And in that moment, you reclaim yourself.